Hey Brandon, how you doing? All right, let's go and take a look. Thank you so much for including your work. I've got your work up right here, and I've also got this document so that we can go ahead and take a look at both documents in the window. And all right, so I think it's a good start. I really do. I think it's an excellent start. I think the word spacing, we want to talk about the word spacing. That's the space between individual words. But I think for the most part, your letter spacing is consistent, albeit somewhat loose through the three words fire and ice. Let's go ahead and start right here. I think the main thing here is you really want to get this craft down. Okay, so like all of you remember coloring within the lines. Okay, so first thing I would do is establish your contour lines and then fill in the color and just be as consistent as possible. Otherwise, we get these little inconsistencies that kind of make the serifs look misshapen. We can see it here, the difference between this shape right here and this shape right here. If we take a look up here, they're almost identical. And in other areas too. We can see the serifs are really thick and much more rounded off than they are here. So look how much thicker these serifs are than these serifs. So you really, really want to strive to be as accurate as possible in depicting the letter forms themselves. That's the main thing. The next thing, I see you've drawn the baseline, but your letter forms actually sit above the baseline. I also see there's no mean line or cap line drawn either, so that points to really difficult to ascertain the size relationships of the capital letters if we don't have that cap line in place to as a point of reference. And the same thing can be said for the mean line as well. So again, I think the first thing to do is establish your baseline as perfectly level. Then put some of those lowercase letters in place so you can go ahead and draw out the mean line and make sure you get that cap line in place. And note how the ascenders for the lowercase d, that serif, that descender on the vertical stem of the lowercase d, notice how that rises above the cap line. Also notice how some areas right here, some of the serifs actually extend above the mean line. And then we also see, and that's these are all covered in optical relationships from week 2 lecture, but we can see also there are some areas that extend below the baseline. Specifically, the curved letter forms sit below. So we can see the curved letter forms sit above the mean line and below the baseline. And that is called overshoot. And again, that is a optical relationship that's built into letter forms, and one that should be addressed here in your final iteration for fire and ice. You definitely want to accommodate for an overshoot in your presentation. Okay, so we're talking about consistency. We talk about the importance of baseline, mean lines, cap line. We talk about overshoot in its relevance to optical relationships. Let's talk about letter spacing. I think your letter spacing is pretty good, right? I think there's a couple of areas that are a little bit loose. Based on what we have between the FI and the IR, I think this space is a little loose right here. The R is definitely tilted a little bit right to left, top to bottom. So you want to definitely straighten that out. So I think we can close down your kerning a little bit between here and definitely right here. Then we take a look at the word and. I think the A, well, they're not sitting on a level baseline, so that is problematic. But I think the A could be moved a little bit closer to the N. As you can see, this relationship here between the serifs, a little bit closer there. And I think this is pretty good right here. Then we jump over to ice. I think ice is actually kerned quite nicely. However, I will say that the space between the C and the E is a little tight. I would add a little bit of space right there. Now, let's talk about word spacing. You can see with this consistent word spacing here, meaning that the volume between the word fire and appears to be the same volume as the area between and ice, right? So they appear to be equidistant. However, they're not. The tracking values and the kerning values are considerably different there. However, they look consistent, and that's what we're after. The reason we want it to look consistent is this. In your example, we can see that there's a greater space between the word fire and the word and than there is associated with the space between and ice. So this space here is greater than this space here. That forces the eye and the mind to establish this as a kind of a resting point, because that's basically in essence what you've done. You've established a resting spot right here. The mind just does what it's told. So the fact that this space here is wider than this space here makes us kind of break after the word fire. So as you can see, the result is the cadence would be something like this: fire and ice. Even though there's no comma there, that space is a little bigger, indicating that there's more of a pause there, right? So as we don't want that, we want to be able to perceive this as one phrase: fire and ice. You can see we can clearly do that here because of the consistency in the spacing here. But then we drop down here, we can clearly see how it would be easy to say fire and ice as opposed to fire and ice. For that reason, you want to establish a good consistent word spacing. Okay, those are my recommendations. I'd love to see these changes made for your final iteration. I think it's a great start. Watch that craft, watch your size, get that baseline, mean line, cap line, consistency in presentation, true verticals, overshoot, watch your letter spacing, and adjust your word spacing according to my comments previously in this video, and go ahead and resubmit for Sunday. If you have any questions between now and then, please let me know, and I'll be glad to address anything that in that regard before Sunday submission. All right, great start. Thank you very much.